right? So now my line is back to like 23 weeks, something like that. And so I had always said that I would never work for an affiliate or a Planned Parenthood facility or any facility that aborted babies past the point of viability. That had sort of been what I had said. So in January of that year, there was an announcement made internally that we were starting a capital campaign to build the largest abortion facility in the Western Hemisphere. And it was going to be in our affiliate in Houston, Texas. And this affiliate, this facility was going to be 78,000 square feet. It was going to be an $18 million capital campaign. It was going to be a 7-story building, and it was going to be able to perform 75 abortions every day, 6 days a week. That was going to be our capacity with one abortion provider. Of course, double that if you had 2 on staff. And we were going to be aborting babies through 24 weeks of pregnancy. And so now I found myself in this moral dilemma, right? Like, oh no, that's past my point, my People magazine point of viability, right? And so now what do I do, right? And so I finally, in January, that was really the first time where I remember coming home and telling my husband, I don't know if I'm gonna be able to stay here once this building is open and we're doing this procedure. In May of that year, every year in about April or May, we ran out of Title X and Title 20 cash grant funding that comes from the federal government and then is dispersed by states. So it's unlike Title 19, Medicaid, which is sort of an unending pot of money that you can bill, and they never run out. Title 10 and Title 20 is a specific cash grant program, so once you're out of that money, you're out. And so any patient you see on the Title 10 or Title, you're not going to get reimbursed for those services. So we had run out that year at the end of April. And so in May, we had a management meeting, and the primary people that we had on Title 10 and Title 20 funding were minors, because Title 10 doesn't require parental consent for any services, and undocumented immigrants. So women who couldn't get Medicaid because of their immigration status. And so this was, in my mind, a group of very vulnerable women who needed to continue to receive health care even though we had run out of funds. And so in May of that year, in a management meeting, they were telling us that, we no longer can see these patients, and if we see them, we're gonna have to charge them full price. So, full price, what full price looks like for, let's say, a contraceptive visit. Now, understand, I'm not a proponent of contraception now, but at the time I was. So, a Depo-Provera shot, okay? It cost us $7 for the shot. That was our cost. But we were charging patients $150 for the injection, plus an injection fee of $30. So these teenagers and undocumented women who are generally impoverished, we're now asking them to pay $180 for a Depo-Provera injection that we literally paid $7 to $8 for, okay? So this was problematic for me. So I said this in the meeting, like, okay, can't we give them a discount here? I mean, like, can't we maybe charge $15 for the injection? I mean, why does our margin have to be so high? And the answer was, if they really want it, they'll do whatever they can to save the money and get it. And that was then another sort of glimpse into the heart of the management of Planned Parenthood and how we were really treating the patients that were coming to us. Okay, then in August of that year, I had a budget meeting with my supervisor, and I was instructed during that meeting that not only were we going to now be strongly implementing an abortion quota, so a certain quota, a certain number of abortions that we had to sell to patients every month, but that the previous quota that they had imposed on our clinic was now going to be doubling in the upcoming fiscal year. And that was problematic for me because I truly believed that we were there to reduce the number of abortions, not that we were there to sell or push this abortion as a product, right? And so that was troubling for me, and so I said something out loud to my supervisor, and I said, what? Right, this has to be a mistake. I mean, what do you mean? And I said, I thought we were trying to reduce the number of abortions here. I mean, that's what I say to the media. That's what I say to people when they ask. And she just laughed at me and sort of scoffed and said, Abby, why would we want to reduce the number of abortions? That's how we make our money. And so that was bothersome, but not enough to make me walk away from my job there. But it did make me seriously consider what I was doing with the organization. And then a month later, we had a visiting physician come in from out of town, and he was explaining to me that at his own private practice, he performed abortions differently than our protocol stated at Planned Parenthood. So I'll just sort of explain Planned Parenthood's protocol for an abortion, for a first trimester abortion. So let me just also explain that. So Planned Parenthood has about 70 affiliates nationwide. Those 70 affiliates then operate all of the less than 700 clinics across the country. But those affiliates are basically, they are under the Planned Parenthood Federation of America, which is the national Planned Parenthood organization, right? And so they have contracted physicians there with PPFA, and they distribute medical protocols, and those protocols then go to the affiliates, and those affiliates then disseminate them to their local clinics. And the reason I say this is to just explain that if you were to walk in to get a first trimester abortion in Charlottesville, Virginia, it's going to be performed the same way as a first trimester abortion at a Planned Parenthood in Tampa, Florida, okay, because the protocols are all the same. So our protocol for abortion was to begin the procedure with a heavy amount of sedation, conscious sedation. We did this for really 3 reasons. One, because the combination of fentanyl and Versed that we gave to the patient creates an amnesic effect for her, and so she's less likely to remember the sounds or the smells or what was said in the room, the conversation, and even sometimes the discomfort that she felt. The second reason is because once we had them on the table and had them sedated, we would bring an ultrasound over. We wanted to perform an ultrasound really for one reason, and that was to determine how far along the woman was in her pregnancy so that we would know how much to charge her for the abortion. We needed her sedated during that part of the visit because we didn't want to take a chance that she might pop her head up and see what was on the ultrasound monitor, because see, the ultrasound exposes the lie of the abortion industry. That is why they fight so hard against ultrasound legislation across the country. They do not want women to see what's taking place inside of their womb. And then the third reason is because the doctor does not want to have conversation with the patient at all during the abortion procedure. He does not want to talk to her. He does not want to have to answer any questions. What we hear all the time is that abortion is a decision that should be made between a woman and her doctor, right? But nothing could be further from the truth, because women do not consult with the abortion doctor that is going to be actually performing the procedure before the abortion. Many times they don't even know the name of the physician that's performing the abortion. One of our abortion doctors would he would wear this like covering over his head that just showed like this part of his face, and then he would wear his surgical mask, so all you could see were like his eyes, because he did not want anybody recognizing him. He didn't want any patients being able to identify him. And we never gave the patient his name. We actually gave the patient a fake name, so that they would not be able to look up who their physician was. And so the doctor comes in and he begins the procedure by artificially dilating the woman's cervix. So what naturally happens during childbirth, he's going to do artificially with metal dilation rods. And he's going to open up the cervix enough so that he can insert something called a cannula. A cannula is sort of like a straw. It's a rigid tube that's hooked up to the suction tube, and that cannula is actually what goes into the woman's uterus. So he takes that cannula and he inserts it into the woman's uterus, and he just blindly pokes around inside the woman's uterus until he thinks he has enough blood and tissue in a glass jar. The ultrasound is gone, so he's not using that ultrasound during the surgery, which is crazy, right? Because I can't think of any other surgery that's done in this sort of blind manner, right? Like, anybody ought to have like a blind appendectomy or like a blind root canal, or like that would be ridiculous, right? But this is the accepted standard of care inside of the abortion industry. This is the accepted surgical standard for the most common surgical procedure performed in our country. So, you know, when he was explaining this, he was saying, you know, the physician can't see what he's doing, and so I perform abortions differently. So it's no wonder that we had such a high rate of uterine perforation, where the doctor would poke a hole through the woman's uterus, because he literally could not see what he was doing during the abortion procedure. So this visiting doctor that came in, he was like, no, this is safer for the patient if we use the ultrasound during the entire procedure. And so I went back to my supervisor and said, look, if this is the safest care that we can provide for women, if this is the safest type of procedure, why isn't this the standard of care inside of our facilities? And she said, well, yes, it is safer for the woman, but she said, using an ultrasound during the abortion takes about an extra 3 minutes of time per patient. And our goal inside of Planned Parenthood was to have a woman on the table, off the table, abortion complete in 5 minutes. And so adding an additional 3 minutes of time per patient was just simply not something that we could do. If you're trying to do, you know, 40 abortions a day, you just simply don't have the extra 3 minutes of time per patient. And so I accepted that answer, but this doctor told me that if time presented, he would show me what this type of abortion procedure looked like. He said he thought it would be a good learning experience for me. And so that time did come, and I was asked to assist in the abortion procedure. My job during the abortion was to hold the ultrasound probe on the woman's abdomen so that the doctor would be able to, in his words, visualize his target. Just for clarification, I am not a doctor. I am not a nurse. Like I said, I'm not even a medical assistant. I have no medical credentials to my name. I am a licensed therapist by education. So if you're having a crummy day, we can talk about it. But if you need some sort of medical procedure, I mean, I'm really not your gal. But like I said before, medical certification is not required inside of Planned Parenthood facilities outside of the physician. I mean, I was doing things that were completely illegal for me to do. I was starting IVs. I was pushing anesthesia. I was giving out medications. I was doing all kinds of things that I was not legally allowed to do, but was trained by Planned Parenthood to believe that it was completely acceptable for me to do these things. And so we stood there and we did the ultrasound. We found that the baby was 13 weeks along. Now, at 13 weeks, everything is fully formed on the fetus. So arms, legs, fingers, toes, heart's beating, brain waves are active. All of the internal organs have been formed. Outside of the womb, the baby's about this big, and we can even tell if it's a boy or a girl. And so I stood there, you know, feeling a little apprehensive about what I was going to see, because I could see the full profile of the child's body in the womb. But I was certain that no matter what I saw, this fetus, whatever you want to call it, was not going to feel anything, because Planned Parenthood had sent out a memo specifically about that. So the most frequently asked question we got from women seeking an abortion was, will my baby feel this? And so Planned Parenthood had scripted an answer for us to give back in these situations, and that scripted answer was no, the fetus has no sensory development or does not feel anything for 28 weeks. And I mean, I knew that was a lie. I mean, everybody knows that's a lie. The women that, you know, I'd give them this answer, they knew it was a lie. These women are so desperate to believe anything to justify their reason for having an abortion. They will believe anything that we told them to sort of create a salve on their conscience. So I stood there looking at the screen, and I could see the cannula, the suction tube. The suction wasn't yet turned on. I could see that going into the woman's uterus, and I could see it getting closer and closer to the side of this baby. And when it touched his side, he jumped. And he began flailing his arms and legs as if he was trying to move away from the abortion instrument. But there was nowhere for him to go. And when the doctor had the cannula in the right position, he asked the technician to turn on the suction machine, and he said, "Beam me up, Scotty." And the suction was turned on, and you know, it's hard to describe what I saw. Really, the best way to describe it is, you know, when you get a towel wet and you wring that towel to get all the moisture out, that's what the baby's body looked like it was doing. It was twisting because of the suction and eventually coming apart in pieces. And the last thing, you know, on an x-ray, bones, they show up really bright white. So the very last thing that I saw on the ultrasound screen was this perfectly formed little backbone that was sort of swirling around in the uterus, and then finally suctioned in. And in just a few seconds, the screen was black, and I knew that that meant the abortion had been successful. And you know, I didn't really know. I think one of the questions I get a lot was, you know, how did you feel when you saw that? And it's sort of hard to explain how I felt. I think I felt very numb. I wasn't crying. I didn't feel upset. I think I was sort of in shock of what I had just seen, because I had not expected that, because I had believed what Planned Parenthood had told me, for what the abortion industry had told me for 8 years. I did not believe that there was life in the womb, or I don't know if I didn't believe it, it was just inconsequential to me. It didn't matter to me if there was a life there or not, because the woman's rights, in my mind, always trumped the rights of the baby, no matter what. And so I remember one time a sidewalk counselor asking me, like, you know, when do you think life begins? And I remember turning around and saying, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter when life begins in the womb. What matters is the woman's life, and her decision and her bodily autonomy, right? That's like the new pro-choice phrase everybody likes to throw around. And so, you know, I felt in a way like I had been duped by this organization. I felt really stupid for believing them for so long. But I mean, I also recognize that I was not a victim. I had very eagerly believed their lies because that's what was comfortable for me. And I knew that I didn't want to leave my job. It actually took me a week to decide that I had to leave. I knew that something was going to have to change, but honestly, I didn't want to leave my job. I made a lot of money when I worked at Planned Parenthood. I met famous people all the time. I, you know, had all of these like luxuries and fun trips and things like that, and I didn't want to give that up. And all of my friends were affiliated with Planned Parenthood. And so I didn't want to leave that behind. But one day I was sitting at my desk and I had said to myself, well, until I figure out what I'm gonna do, I'm just not gonna participate in abortions anymore. I'm just gonna sit in my office and pretend that I'm busy, and I'm not gonna participate in any abortions. But that day, that Monday, we were doing the medication abortion. We were giving out the medication abortion pill. And so I was sitting there at my desk and I was watching all of these women walk out with these brown bags of medicine. And I knew that they had already taken the first pill that was gonna kill their baby. I knew that the abortion had already begun. And I knew that I was still sitting there complicit in the act of abortion. And so I decided that I would leave. And, you know, with help from the local pro-life community, I was able to leave and have a safety net built around me so that I didn't have to worry about losing my home, or how am I going to pay my mortgage, or how am I going to pay childcare, or whatever, the things that I was worried about. And so, and I had friendship, because when I left Planned Parenthood, and this was actually a surprise to me, like, I know y'all are gonna be like, you're an idiot, but it was actually a surprise to me when I left that none of my friends at Planned Parenthood wanted to be friends with me anymore. Like, I thought, well, you know, they're pro-choice, and so I've made a different choice, right? And so they're gonna respect that because choice, right? And so, to my surprise, Planned Parenthood actually filed a lawsuit against me, trying to get a permanent gag order against me so that I wouldn't be able to do this, which, hindsight, that was smart on their, you know, they were worried I was gonna go around, like, expose all their secrets and look what I'm doing. So, but that had actually not been my intention. Like, my intention had been to get a job with an OB-GYN that had already offered me a position, and so that was my plan, right? But then when they sued me, they sent a press release to the AP and saying, you know, well, we're just really regretful that we're having to turn to the courts to protect our patients from this, you know, rogue former employee, Abby Johnson, so dangerous. And so it wasn't that I had, like, left the clinic. That wasn't what was newsworthy. What was newsworthy was that I had left the clinic and then they were suing me for it, right? So that got picked up by, like, every major mainstream news outlet in the country. And so, you know, I leave my job and then all of a sudden, like, I find myself on, you know, all these media programs, and thankfully I was media trained by Planned Parenthood, so, you know, thanks for that. So it was a little daunting, but when I got sued, I called my friends, right, from the clinic, and because I was like, oh, they're gonna be able to tell me what's going on here, like what, because I was shocked that I had received this injunction, right? And so I called my friends, and so I call the first number, and it says her phone's disconnected. And I was like, that's weird. And I was like, she must have changed her number. And like, no, told me. And then I called my other friend who was still working at the clinic, and her phone was disconnected. And I was like, what? I couldn't believe it. Like, so I knew then, okay, they are part of this, right? And so the people that I called my best friends, I then found testifying against me in court. And so that was a shock, to say the least. And so, anyway, and so that's sort of what I started doing. I started, you know, speaking out and talking about what was going on inside of the clinics, and then like having a million kids. And then in 2012, I wrote, my first book came out in 2011, and I wrote it in hopes that someone who was still in the abortion clinic would read it, would like pick it up as a critic and read it and then find some truth in it and go, I think I want to leave too. Because I actually hate writing, so that was really the only reason that I thought this would be a good idea. And so, book came out, and within like the first, 6 months after its release, my husband and I had financially helped 17 people leave the abortion industry. And so, and I thought surely in, what, it was like almost 40 years of, fighting abortion, I thought surely somebody had created an organization nationally to sort of reach into abortion clinics and try to end this thing from the inside out, trying to pull out workers, and nobody had. And I think it was because the pro-life movement generally looked at abortion workers and abortion doctors and thought they are beyond our help and they would never come to us. But I knew that wasn't true because I went to a pro-life group when I left, so I knew it was possible, and I knew that there were other people in the industry who would want to leave. And so I didn't know what I was doing, but I started an organization called And Then There Were None. And when we were making like our strategic plan and budget, we had no money, but we were budgeting anyway. And we thought that if we had 10 abortion workers leave a year, that would be like major success, because I'm gonna be honest, it's sort of a hard sell. So we couldn't believe it when that first year we had about 60 workers come to us, and then the second year we had almost 100, and every year we've had at least 100 workers come to us. And so we're at year 5 now, and we are at about 440 workers who have come through our program and have left the abortion industry. And what we didn't expect, like we figured we'd have nurses and medical assistants and other people leaving, but we didn't expect that we would have abortion doctors that would come through our organization. But to date, we've actually had 7 full-time abortion doctors leave their practices and come through our organization. So that's been really exciting. And so I think, I want to open up to questions now, but I think, a lot of talk is made about, making abortion illegal. And while I certainly agree, because with many people, laws dictate morality. That's just the way it is. We had many, many women who came in who said, I don't, you know, I've never thought abortion was okay, but it's legal, so it must not be that bad. And so while I certainly believe that, you know, one of our short-term goals must be to make abortion illegal, I believe the long-term goal is to make abortion unthinkable, so that we have resources and strategies in place to help women, so that we have paid maternity leave, so that we have health care for children, so that, you know, we have child care subsidy programs in every state, that we expand the WIC program, that we allow women to have access to SNAP food benefits and things like that. We have to have resources available for women. It's not enough for us to just say, oh good, you chose life for your baby, good luck with that, right? And so we have to be able to provide practical resources for these women. And Feminists for Life actually had done some research on that and had found that even a woman just knowing that through a pregnancy care center, she could receive diapers for her child through 2 years of age was sometimes enough to make a woman go, you know what, I don't think I have to have an abortion. So just that little bit of support is enough many times for women to say, yes, I can do this, absolutely. And you know, the majority of women who are choosing abortion are doing so because they feel like they have no other choice. I don't think I've ever met a woman who's walking into an abortion clinic that's like, I'm so excited to be exercising my right to choose today, right? Like, she's walking into an abortion clinic. I mean, the term pro-choice is really a myth, because women are having abortions because they feel like they have no other choice. And they feel like all their other choices have been taken away from them, and that this is their only option. They have abortions out of desperation and out of lack of resources. And so I believe that that's one of the amazing things that even student organizations can provide is, you know, working with pregnancy centers like you guys are doing, and letting students know, creating a culture on campus so that pregnant students are welcomed, that they are helped, that resources are available to them, that there are support groups available, that there are, you know, parenting groups on campus that meet and have play dates, that there is childcare resources available on campus. You know, all of those types of things are enough to drive a woman to make a decision for either abortion or for life. And so part of what we have to do, and we understand, I mean, I'm sort of old compared to most of you guys. Like, I'm about to be 38, so I know y'all are like, hey, shut up. But sort of like what we have to do, like our generation, your generation, like we have to do it, what we have to do is, and what sets us apart from many times like the baby boomer generation is that we are looking at pro-life from more of a holistic mindset, right? We're not just looking at it from being like a pro-baby mindset, like save the baby, save the baby, save the baby. We understand that we cannot save that baby until we help that mom. And so that sort of sets us apart in some ways. And even when I post things like that on my, you know, Facebook page, and even recognizing that the woman who goes to an abortion clinic is a secondary victim of abortion, right? That she's a victim of the systemic climate in our culture that tells her that abortion is acceptable, that tells her abortion is normal, that tells her that she's gonna be just fine, she's gonna feel relieved after she has an abortion procedure, that abortion is normal, that, you know, these women are secondary victims to abortion. And even that is sort of a newer thought process, honestly, in the pro-life movement, because when there is human tragedy of this nature, we look for someone to blame. And we understand that you cannot blame these women that society has failed. That we have to do what we can to uphold their dignity as well, not just the dignity of their unborn child. So I'd like to open it up to questions, anything and everything.
The solution to abortion being contraception. How would you respond to that?
Yeah, so that would have been also that was my way of thinking even when I first left Planned Parenthood. I was like, you crazy pro-lifers, like, you don't want abortion and then you don't want contraception, like, what do you want, right? You can't have it both ways, you idiots. And but then I started actually looking at the research, and the overwhelming amount of peer-reviewed research shows that where there are higher rates of contraception, there are, in fact, higher rates of abortion. So I think the logical thinking is that when you contracept, and then you prevent abortion. But peer-reviewed research is showing us, not like Yahoo research, but like peer-reviewed research is showing us that that's actually not the case. And that really makes sense, because when you look at hormonal birth control and you look at what it does to a woman's body, okay, it is classified as a group 1 carcinogen, which means it is a cancer-causing drug. It's in the same category as like asbestos and formaldehyde and these things that we would never put in our bodies intentionally, right? It's in that same group of carcinogens. If a woman is willing to put something into her body, knowing that this could give her cancer, she's that desperate not to have a baby that she's willing to give herself cancer for it. I don't think it's a long jump then to say, well, then if she's that desperate not to have a baby, then if she does get pregnant, then abortion doesn't look that bad after all. And so I'm sort of like, I'm more figures and data, and so looking at the figures and data show me that birth control is not the solution to abortion. And not to mention the potential abortifacient consequences of hormonal birth control. So when we look at birth control options, we see that in all cases, this is on the manufacturing data. So when you get birth control, you know when you get a pill and the pharmacist gives you that like long information sheet that you chunk in the trash? Okay, well, if you get that with birth control and you actually look at it, it describes the various mechanisms for how birth control works. So the primary mechanism for birth control is that it prevents ovulation, okay? But we know that about 7 to 10% of the time, ovulation will occur. So then there has to be a backup method for how this works so that you won't get pregnant, right? So that you won't have a pregnancy. So that you will control your birth, right? So the backup mechanism then is to create a hostile uterine environment. It thins the lining of the uterus to the point that a newly conceived baby, a fertilized egg, which if we believe life begins at conception, then at that moment of conception, there is a new and unique individual human being that's created. And that individual human being that is created, because of the hostile uterine environment, is not able to implant inside the uterus. And so because of that, she will essentially spontaneously abort the baby because there is nowhere for the baby to grow and thrive and be healthy. And so if we look at those properties as well in birth control, then everybody who says life begins at conception should have a moral dilemma in their soul about the use of contraception. But even if you don't, if you look at just the way that women's health care has been treated over the past several hundreds of years, you can see that women have been failed by the medical community. If I walk into a doctor and I say, I've got really bad acne, I need something to help with that, the doctor is gonna say, oh, I'll put you on birth control. If I walk into a doctor and I say, I have really heavy periods with a lot of cramping, the doctor is gonna say, oh, well, here's birth control to help you with that. If I walk in and I say, I have cysts on my ovaries and they're rupturing and causing me pain and I have PCOS, the doctor is going to say, here's some birth control, right? Birth control seems to be the only fix for women's bodies in the reproductive healthcare world, but in fact, it's not fixing anything. It's only masking the symptoms that a woman is living with. In fact, just today, one of my dear friends, for like all of her fertile years, she's like 37, I think she's my age, she's like 37. All of her fertile years, she's had incredible pain with her periods. She's had all of these problems with menstruation and cramping and cycles and all this kind of stuff. And she's been going to doctor after doctor after doctor, trying to find a solution. And every single doctor that she's gone to, the solution has been birth control. Today, she had to undergo essentially an emergency hysterectomy to remove a uterine tumor out of her uterus that is the size of a baby. Because throughout all of these years of her life, she has been failed by the medical community who advocates for reproductive health care. And she had to have a full hysterectomy at the age of 37. That is a blatant failure for women. And that's another reason that I can't, as a woman, advocate for a method that is actually not fixing any of our problems. It's only it's like putting a Band-Aid over a bullet wound. It's just slowing down the process that's already taking place in your body. It's not actually getting to the root cause of what's happening. But medical professionals, I mean, I'm sorry if there's any doctors here, but medical professionals have become very lazy when it comes to women's health care and not actually getting to the root cause of why we have a very complicated reproductive system, right? It's not as easy as guys, right? Like, we have a very complicated reproductive system, so the fact that that's not being taken seriously is truly a fault of the medical community. Yes, ma'am.
So this is sort of two parts, they go hand in hand. Can you discuss a little bit this idea that pro-life women can't be feminists, so they can't be pro-women? Because I've gotten a lot of people telling me that it's not possible to be both. And then also this idea that men should not be allowed to have a say in abortion. Can you discuss that too, and like any experiences that you've had and how you respond?
Sure. So pro-life feminism is real. As most of you know, the early feminists, the founding mothers of the feminist movement, were in fact pro-life. Actually, a cool story, Sarah probably told you guys this when she was here, but cool story is when Susan B. Anthony. When Susan B. Anthony, when one of her friends or any woman in the community would have a baby, she would raise this flag in her yard to signify what an amazing experience, an amazing woman that woman was for going through childbirth. And that was really celebrated. Like, the women were celebrated for their fertility, was celebrated during that time. And they were absolutely against abortion for many reasons, but one is because it's basically forcing women to choose, right? So, you know, today the cultural feminist perspective says that women can't succeed without abortion. And that is blatantly false. Women can succeed without abortion. I believe women succeed with greater outcomes when they don't choose abortion. I believe that abortion is a decision that women make when they are weak. And I'm saying that as a woman who's had 2 abortions. The 2 weakest moments of my life were the moments that I decided that my life was more valuable than the life of the child that I helped to create. There's nothing more unnatural than pitting a woman against her child. Biologically, it's unnatural. Emotionally, it is unnatural. And so, you know, basically what we're saying as pro-life feminists is that we don't have to kill other people in order to be liberated, right? That we can embrace life, and embracing life means liberation for women. But that's one of the problems, and I can go on about this, that's one of the problems in our society, is that we have forgotten what gender roles are for men and women. So you've got now groups of men that act like women, and you have groups of women that act like men, and we have sort of this androgynous culture. And I'm sorry, I'm not being politically correct here, and I don't care. But we have this androgynous culture, and we have all of this confusion, right, in our culture. And it's because people have forgotten that there are distinct and complementary gender roles, and that gender is not fluid, that gender is a biological fact. And so the fact that we have gotten so far away from that is truly one of the reasons I believe that we're in this mess that we're in our culture. The reason that we have men saying that they identify as a woman and using a woman's bathroom, or, you know, the fact that we've got groups, we have thousands and thousands of these effeminate men walking around in our culture not knowing what the plan is for their life and how men are created to be protectors. They are created to be defenders. And I don't care I don't care who it is. I don't care what women say. I don't care what label they put on themselves. Every single woman on the planet wants to find her knight in shining armor. Okay? That's why God gave us dads, right? Because that's what they are for us. Our dads are our protectors. That is the role that they play in little girls' lives. That is how we are shaped. That's how we are formed. That's how it's meant to be. But we have said that this cultural feminism has basically told men not to be men. So we have a culture of young men who are growing up that have no idea what it is to be a man. Not to mention that many of them, a large percentage of young men in our society today, are growing up without fathers. So they're not seeing this modeled in their own homes. They're not seeing this modeled in their own lives. I believe one of the primary antidotes to abortion is fatherhood. But we aren't taking fatherhood seriously in this culture because we have a group of women that says, I don't need any man. We do need men. And particularly, we need men to raise children. That is the design for the family. And that is the biological, natural design for the family. But we've gotten away from that. We've gotten away from what biology tells us. We've gotten away from what science tells us. And now we're living under these strange cultural norms that are anything but normal. And so men have essentially been silenced by cultural feminism today, and they've been told that you don't have a voice in this movement. In fact, if you have an opinion about abortion, shut up, unless your opinion is pro-choice. They only want, that's one thing too. Like, I was literally at a rally one time in Louisiana. A dude was holding a sign that said, no uterus, no opinion. Like, he was protesting the pro-life event. A man holding a sign that said, no uterus, no opinion. I walk up to him and I said, you're a dude, right? And he said, yes. And I said, so then you don't have an opinion about this, right? So why are you here? And he goes, no, I do, because I value women's rights. Like, that's the hypocrisy of the abortion movement, right? That is the lingo that they're using. And it even goes beyond that. Like, we even look at like pro-choice science, right? Which is a myth, right? But we look at pro-choice science. It's a total misnomer. And they say, well, a pregnancy, if a pregnancy is wanted, then it's a baby. But if a pregnancy is unwanted, then it is just tissue. That makes no scientific sense. Like, nothing magically happens in the birth canal that suddenly turns a pregnancy into a baby. Okay? Like, it's not magical down there. Okay? It just is what it is. Okay? It just is science. You're never pregnant. A woman is never pregnant with anything other than a scientifically proven human being. If it's not a human being, then what is it? Like, is it a cat? Are we pregnant with birds until a certain point? Like when the woman says, oh, no, okay, I'm ready to be a mom. And then all of a sudden it turns into, no, like their science is flawed. It's not science at all. And their logic behind men being involved in the pro-life movement is flawed. It always has been, it always will be, because they honestly hate men. Cultural feminists hate men. When I was getting married to my husband, Doug, and I worked at Planned Parenthood, my boss begged me not to get married. And she said, please don't get married. Because if you get married, you know what happens next? You get pregnant. And then if you get pregnant, then you can't give 100% to your job. And this is more important than you having a family. I would say 50% of the women that I worked with at Planned Parenthood were lesbians. There is a culture that is very anti-male in the pro-choice movement. And the only men that I did work with at Planned Parenthood were homosexual. I never worked with any man that wasn't. And so they need to dismantle the family, their traditional family, in order to keep up their shtick. And you know what's interesting though? I was on Twitter. I'm gonna hate Twitter, but I'm on it anyway. And I was on Twitter, and this guy's like, you know, well, I don't know. I had said something on Twitter. I had made a post, and then this guy had responded, like a pro-life guy had responded, like an affirming comment to what I had made. And he's like, whatever, dude, you don't have an opinion because you're a guy. A guy telling another guy this, right? And so I said, okay, well, so I responded to this pro-choice guy, and I said, okay, well, then in that case, do you then say that Roe v. Wade was a law that shouldn't be upheld? And he's like, no, of course not. And I said, but it was decided by an all-male Supreme Court. So, again, like, help me understand your perspective here. And he's like, that doesn't even make sense. And I'm like, okay. And like, then he blocked me. So, whatever. So that, I mean, you know, yes, men absolutely have a voice in this. And I would say that some of the most effective people, I mean, I go out to the sidewalks and sidewalk council outside of abortion clinics. I'm one of those people. And I would say that some of the most effective sidewalk counselors we have out in front of abortion clinics are men. And I don't know if you would agree with that, but I think it's interesting to me because I see it, and like I can reach out to a woman and she'll like flip me off, but then like the guy I'm standing with will reach out to her and she's like, okay, I'll block you. And like we're saying the same thing, right? But I think that because these women that are walking into abortion clinics feel failed by men, because they're often walking in alone. They're walking in without the presence of the man that got them, that helped to get them in this position in the first place. They're often coerced. 64% of women who have abortions state they felt forced or coerced into having an abortion, and most of that percentage comes from the man involved. And so I think that they feel very failed by men, And so to have a man outside who's saying, hey, I'm willing to step up and help you, I think that's very attractive to women, not in a sexual way, but just like in an emotional way. I think that's very attractive to women. And like I used to go out with this guy, his name was Ruben. Okay, now he's like really good looking and he's like Latino, but let's just put that to the side. He had incredible success on the sidewalk. Maybe it was because he was really good looking, but he had like an incredible presence on the sidewalk. And if he reached out to a woman, like I'm telling you, probably like 90% of the time she would come over and talk to him. Because he was young, he was articulate, and he was very genuine, and that came across, like even in that short presentation that he had to try to talk to that woman, and he moved, and he's doing it somewhere else now, but he had he helped to have so many safes on that sidewalk, and these women, they just trusted him. I mean, it was weird. Like, he would be like, hey, I'll take you to the pregnancy center. And they're like, okay, stranger, I'll get in your car. Because I think women they're lacking that in their lives and they want it so desperately. Like, they want a man to step up. And so here was one who was willing to do it. And they were all over it. Yes, sir.
What would you say are a couple of the worst things about how the media, like the news media, cover abortion?
So, I think just sort of this like Teflon coating that the abortion industry seems to have with the media is really frustrating. You know, we can put out, like for instance, when we put out our checkmyclinic.org site, like the media doesn't want to cover it. The only people that will cover it is like Fox and Christian media, right? Like MSNBC doesn't want to cover it, CNN doesn't want to cover it. So like this sort of protection for the abortion industry is very, very frustrating. And then I think the other most frustrating thing for me is that when they go to interview people, okay, like let's say there's a rally, okay, and there's all these young people there, right? And there's all these like cute young women, right, from a college, or there's all these like young people there or whatever. They're gonna find like the one old guy in the audience who's like holding like a dead aborted baby picture, and that's who they're going to interview for our side. But for the pro-choice side, they're going to get like a group of like really attractive young women to talk about why they are pro-choice. And so that sort of I mean, it's really sort of like discrimination like in our movement, because they don't want to acknowledge. They want to believe that the pro-life movement is a bunch of old white people. And it is primarily white. I mean, this audience tonight is super white, except for you. It's like pretty ultra white in here. So, you know, I mean, it's like that's one of the problems, right? Is it seems very polarizing. Like abortion is a white person issue, and more progressive issues are minority issues. And I think we've sort of done that to ourselves as well, because, okay, like all these school shootings that just happened. Okay, let me just say, I don't care what you think about gun rights, okay? Like, don't care, don't want to hear it, okay? But I can't tell you how many times I saw someone post about like all these kids that died in a school shooting. I can't tell you how many times I saw a pro-lifer comment on that post and say, yeah, that's bad. I wish they cared more about the aborted babies that are dying every day. And I'm like, come on, man. Like, stop it with the like fetal tunnel vision, right? We've got to step outside of our own issues sometime and grieve with those who are grieving and mourn with those who are mourning. And we have to be able to say, hey, look, I don't know where you are on the political spectrum. I don't know where you are with gun rights, but I know that there was loss of innocent life here, and so I'm going to grieve with you. And we're not going to talk about abortion right now. Like, we're not going to be rude and obnoxious like that. Because every conversation we have with someone doesn't have to come back to abortion. We can look at other current issues in our population, other issues where the sanctity of human life is being devalued, and we can say in those situations, I'm with you, right? And that's something that we've done it to ourselves. And we have not done a good enough job to make inroads with the African American community. The African American community has the worst maternal mortality rate in the nation. And what are we doing about it? Nothing. We're not going to these councils where African Americans are talking about this and trying to talk about solutions. We're just worried about abortion, right? How are we going to make inroads with people and help them understand that we are more alike than we are different? If we aren't willing to lean in to them and willing to lean in to their issue and say, I want to be a part of the solution that you're working on right now. And we're real bad at that. And so, like, I'm a Wilberforce mentor with Students for Life, and my mentee is at Kent State in Ohio, and she, when the school shootings happened in Florida, their pro-life group had a vigil, like a memorial for those kids whose lives were lost in that shooting. And people came up to them, they were like, we thought you were the pro-life group. And she's like, we are. This is an issue that affects life. This is an issue that affects the sanctity of human life. And so we don't always have to be talking about abortion 100% of the time. We can be working with other groups of people and saying, I hear you, I'm with you, let's work together on this. And I think we're not great at doing that, and we have to be better.
Thank you very much. Your presentation was very compelling. I am curious to know if you could share with us what presentation of the pro-life position or the pro-life argument you have found to be most successful in winning hearts over, and ideally one that, I am a Catholic, so I do believe in the sanctity of life, but sometimes I'm dialoguing with somebody who won't accept that kind of terminology. So if you could just give us a couple of examples of what you found to be successful in converting hearts.
Okay, so if we're talking about like women who are supporting abortion and coming at it from like a feminist perspective, I think the most compelling argument comes from Feminists for Life and from Sarah and Foster, and I love everything that they do. And while, you know, the people that, like Saren is religious and Catholic, like the organization is a secular organization, so they're not coming at this from a religious angle. They're coming at it from just a human rights sort of standpoint. So I think that that is very compelling. If you are talking to someone who's coming at it from like an abortion support, that science supports abortion perspective, then I think the most effective arguments come from groups like Secular Pro-Life, because they're atheists who are pro-life. And so they're not coming at it from a religious perspective at all. Now for me, you know, I'm also Catholic, so for me, I know that when I talk about the science behind human life, I know that that science comes from our Creator, right? But I don't have to talk about God in a presentation in order to be convincing about human life and the science of human life and sort of the continuum of life. And sometimes the most effective thing to do when you're talking to someone who's pro-choice is always just to start by asking them questions, you know, so, you know, when do you think abortion is okay? When do you think abortion is not okay? And sort of then start backtracking from there, you know. And so, like, I was talking to this woman one time, and I was like, okay, so when is abortion not okay? And she was like, well, after viability. And I was like, okay, well, current viability is like 23 weeks. So like, what if it goes back to 22? Then is abortion not okay after that? And she's like, no. I'm like, okay, so what if it gets to 20 weeks? Like, then is it not okay? And she's like, no. And I'm like, okay, well, science is actually taking the turn, like, to create artificial wombs to house babies in, like, early on in life, like 13, 14 weeks. Like, I believe that will probably be a reality. I don't think it's right, but I think that that would probably be a reality, like, in my lifetime. So if they can start housing babies like 12, 13 weeks, like, then is abortion wrong then? I mean, medical technology is going to continue to grow, right, and to advance. And so if your line is so fluid like that, like, what's the difference between, if your line's at 22 weeks, what's the difference between a 21-week, 6-day baby and a 22-week baby? You know, what's the difference, right? And so having conversations like that and really making them think and asking questions instead of just giving them like statement after statement after statement, and asking questions and really having them think about why it is that they believe what they believe, I think is really the most effective way to have dialogue with people. And whenever, I really never talk about religion when I'm talking to someone who's pro-choice and I'm like defending my position, and they will 100% of the time always bring up religion first. And they're like, stop pushing your religion down my throat. And I'm like, how do you know I'm religious? I've never even talked about God. Like, I could be an atheist for all I know, for all you know. Like, stop pushing your religion down my throat. Like, you know, and so, you know, I think, I mean, I would never, like, deny the existence of God when I would never deny my faith when talking to someone who is pro-choice, but I don't think that the idea that, like, well, I'm pro-life because God's pro-life, like, that's not going to win over people, particularly people who are not religious. And so those two groups, Feminists for Life and Secular Pro-Life, are probably the two places that I go to most often, and I send people to most often to help them be able to articulate a pro-life, sort of scientific, pro-woman position. Thank you. You're welcome. One more?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. Okay. Yes, sir.
I think it would appear that Planned Parenthood could legitimize their, or like at least on a surface level, could legitimize the facade of healthcare by holding themselves to a higher medical standard and offering things like mammograms. So I guess why don't they hold themselves to a high medical standard or a more robust healthcare plan? And why don't, I don't know how, I think from what you said, it seems like it's held to a low standard, but I don't know how that compares to like the standard we hold hospitals to or other clinics. So like why doesn't like a governing body, I don't really
like
know
intervene,
where this would work within like our government system, but like why isn't there some type of external standard that they're held to?
Yeah, that's a great question. Okay, so, so this is a story I was going to tell about the Check My Clinic thing. So we were calling around, we have an intern, and she's calling around every state health department and asking, because some states do not inspect abortion facilities at all. There's no inspection. So what that means is that like nail salons and spas are more regulated than abortion facilities, because there's no state where those are not regulated. Okay, so our intern called the state of Alaska, and Alaska's weird or whatever, they like sort of do their own thing, right? So, but they're like Texas. So our intern called the health department in Alaska, and she asked, you know, who regulates abortion facilities? And she said, oh, well, nobody regulates them because we don't consider them medical clinics. So they're performing medical procedures, they're performing surgery in their facilities, but the state does not qualify them as medical clinics, right? So obviously there's a failure there at the state level. And I would say probably about probably about 40% of, I would say 30 to 40% of states in the US do not have any sort of supervision for abortion facilities. So that is terrifying to me. There's no regulation, nobody's going in there. In California, actually, there's no inspection of abortion facilities, and but there are rigorous inspection requirements for pregnancy clinics, pregnancy care centers, right? They have all these inspections for them, but none for abortion clinics. And the pregnancy centers are not providing surgeries or anything like that, right? They're giving out diapers most of the time, so it's dangerous work, so anyway, but that's, that has to be done at the state level. So, your state health department generally is legislated just like any other bill that's legislated throughout your state. So, most of the time, if they're going to make, a governor could make a rule and say this governing body, this Department of State Health Services or Health and Human Services, whatever it may be, they are now going to. He can make an executive order like that and say they're now going to be inspecting abortion facilities, but governors are generally not going to do that because they want everything to go through the legislative process. So any changes to that has to go through legislation. And so a bill comes forward and it's voted on by both chambers, and then it's voted out, and then the rule is made where it's going to be housed and governed. Right? But it's just not done. In a lot of places, it's just not done. And I think part of it is, how do I say this? I think part of the reason is because the abortion industry is not seen as a medical industry by many state standards. Many states, they don't have to get licensing to run an abortion facility. So there's just no governing body. Nobody knows what to do with them because they don't have to get the same, they've been provided all these passes by the state government, so they don't have to, some states, they don't have to be medically licensed. They don't have to have a medical facility license, yet they're performing medical care. And so the state's like, well, but they don't have to have a license. So if they don't have a license, then what are we really checking for? Right? Like, what is the standard if there's no license? So it's sort of like this cyclical problem, right? That nobody knows how to manage these clinics. So, but that has to be done on a legislative standpoint. Your first question surrounding why they don't do it, because there's no money in those other services, if I'm perfectly honest. Reimbursement for an STD test by Medicaid is something usually around like $8. Reimbursement for an abortion can be anywhere between $450 to $1,000 for a first trimester abortion. So we're just it's just really a money issue here. And also, I think there is a fear that the more services they provide, the more services they actually provide, the more regulation will then come on them, right? So it's like if we provide like the littlest amount of care, but tell everybody we're a comprehensive care provider, nobody's gonna check, so it's whatever. But like if we provide the smallest amount of care and we're not doing too much, then they'll just keep letting us have this pass. The reason I don't have mammogram machines is because you have to have a license to have a mammogram machine in your facility. Well, for states that don't require a medical license, if they start having to get licenses for equipment in their centers, then that may prompt the state to say, oh, well, they have a license for this, but they're not a medically licensed clinic. Maybe we need to change that. So I think part of it is just sort of a fear of expanding and then having more oversight by the state. But I think the general answer is it's just that there's a lack of money in that sort of care. In our affiliate, and we were the third largest affiliate in the country, when I worked there, we were always in the red on our family planning services. We never made money on family planning. We were always like at least $1 million in the hole on family planning. But our abortion services, we would be in the black by like 10 or 11 million. So they're willing to be sort of a loss leader to get women in the door and to get women hooked on their services, so that when they do end up in that crisis pregnancy, they will go back. I mean, that's just marketing 101, right? They'll go back to that first touch point experience, which was at Planned Parenthood. And that's really, people think I'm crazy when I say this, but that's really what their business plan is all about. So they provide STD testing, not because they really care about the gonorrhea and chlamydia rate in your county, but because they know that people who are participating in, who are worried about STD testing are probably participating in more high-risk sexual behavior. And statistically speaking, if you're participating in more high-risk sexual behavior, you are more likely to have an unintended pregnancy, right? So if Planned Parenthood was that first touch point marketing experience for that woman, then research tells us that's where she's going to go back when she has that unplanned pregnancy. Same thing with contraception. 54% of women who have abortions were using contraception at the time they got pregnant. Planned Parenthood knows that. So, you know, let's get a young girl hooked on the idea that if you take a pill every day, you won't get pregnant, so that she will then be more risky sexually. And then, I mean, look, I'm almost 38 and I can't remember to take a pill at the same time every day, right? So you better believe like a 14 or 15-year-old is not gonna remember to take a pill at the same time. So, and that's what they're banking on. So put them on a birth control method with a high human error rate so that eventually they will fail at that method, like 54% of the women do, and they will then go to where they initially got the contraception from, where they had that first touch point experience. They'll go back to Planned Parenthood, they'll go back to the place where they got the contraception, and then that's a business opportunity for them. It's a selling opportunity for them to sell them an abortion. And that sounds like a crazy conspiracy theory, but it's not. It's just their straight marketing business plan, and it is super effective. It's working. So that's sort of where we have to be then, is to say, okay, how can we intervene before these people have that first experience with Planned Parenthood? How can we get them to a life-affirming medical clinic? How can we get them to a federally qualified health center? How can we get them to these other places so that they never even darken the door of a facility that will then in turn try to sell them on an abortion for profit? So that has to be one of our goals. So, okay, I think I'm done. I'm gonna be around, so if you guys have any questions, I'll be around for a little bit, so feel free to come ask.
Oh golly, that's so nice.
Do I post?
Yes.
Do I quick post?
You wait and ask Aunt Claire, because I can't remember. There's something in the contract.
Aunt Claire. Do I post it?
Awesome. Just one second.
Okay, and this is...
Wait, so can I share that?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I posted it.
Wait, are people do people know what they can do? Local police we're just going.
You turned this on, right?
Did you?
Yeah, I think so. I just hit outputs.
Check out the live feed on like Google.
Because
No.
Okay.